The hunting ship Bloodseeker drifted through the asteroid field like a ghost made of metal and death. Its pilot, Reth, pressed his scaled face against the viewing port and watched the scattered remains of what had once been a human transport vessel. Pieces of hull floated past his window, some still glowing from the heat of whatever weapons had torn the ship apart. Reth belonged to a species that had conquered half the known galaxy through pure predatory skill. The Saurians stood 8 feet tall, their bodies covered in thick scales that could turn aside most small arms fire. Their claws could tear through steel, and their teeth could crush bone. They had evolved from pack hunters on a world where only the strongest survived, and they had carried that philosophy to the stars. To a Saurian, other species fell into 2 categories: useful tools or interesting prey. Humans definitely counted as prey. They were small, weak, and died easily. Their only value came from their ability to work in places too dangerous for more important species, or as entertainment in the fighting pits on the outer worlds. The debris. Field told a story that Reth could read like ancient hunting tracks. Pirates had attacked the human ship, probably looking for slaves or valuable cargo. They had been thorough in their destruction, leaving nothing but twisted metal and frozen bodies drifting in the void. But Reth's sensors were picking up something the pirates had missed. There was still life somewhere in this graveyard. His hunting instincts kicked in immediately. Survivors meant profit. Even damaged humans could be sold for decent money, and if any children had lived through the attack, they would be worth even more. Young slaves could be trained properly, molded into exactly what their masters needed. Reth guided his ship toward the strongest life sign, using his vessel's powerful grappling arms to push aside chunks of debris. The source of the signal turned out to be an emergency pod that had somehow remained attached to what looked like the ship's medical bay. The pod's hull was cracked but still holding atmosphere. He docked with the pod and cycled through the airlock, his massive form filling the small connecting tube. The scent hit him immediately. Fear, death, and something else. Something that made his predator brain pause in confusion. The emergency pod was barely large enough for a dozen humans, but it held only 5 bodies and 1 living occupant. 4 adult humans lay scattered around the small space, their bodies positioned in a defensive circle around the 5th corpse. A human female who had clearly died shielding something with her own body. That something was a human child. The little girl couldn't have been more than 6 standard years old. She sat in the corner where the dead female had protected her, clutching a torn, stuffed animal that might have once been a tiger. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and dried tears marked tracks down her small face. But when she looked up at Reth's massive form filling the pod's entrance, she didn't scream or run or beg. She just watched him with eyes that held too much understanding for someone so young. "My name is Amy," she said in careful Galactic standard, her accent thick with whatever human dialect she had learned first. "These are my family." She gestured to the bodies around her. "They protected me when the bad men came." Reth stared down at the child, his predator instincts warring with something he couldn't identify. She was perfect merchandise, young enough to train, old enough to be useful, and clearly intelligent. The pirates who had destroyed her ship would pay well for such a prize, but something about the scene in the pod made him hesitate. The adult, humans had died protecting her. Not just 1 or 2 of them, but all of them. They had formed a living shield around this one small person, giving their lives so she might survive a few hours longer in a broken pod drifting through space. It wasn't rational behavior. It wasn't efficient. It was the kind of wasteful sacrifice that Saurian culture had evolved beyond millennia ago. So why did it make something stir in his chest that felt almost like respect? "What happened to your ship?" Reth asked, surprising himself by engaging with the child instead of simply stunning her and dragging her to his cargo hold. Amy's small hands tightened on her stuffed animal. "Pirates came. They wanted to take people to sell. Mama and Papa and Uncle Joe and Teacher Lynn tried to get everyone to the escape pods, but there weren't enough. She looked around at the bodies with a sadness that seemed far too deep for such a young face. They stayed with me because I was too little to work the pod controls by myself. The simple explanation hit Reth harder than he expected. These humans had chosen death over abandoning one child. They had sacrificed their own chances of escape to ensure she survived, even though survival in a damaged pod in the middle of nowhere had been a slim hope at best. Why didn't they put you in a pod by yourself? Reth found himself asking. Amy tilted her head in that peculiar gesture humans used when they were thinking. Because that's what families do. We take care of each other. We don't leave people behind, especially the little ones. The words were so matter-of-fact, delivered with the simple certainty only children possessed. To her, the adult's sacrifice wasn't heroic or tragic. It was just what people did. It was natural law, as basic as gravity or the speed of light. Reth's hunting ship was equipped with restraints and stun weapons designed for capturing live prey. His original plan had been simple: secure the survivor, return to the nearest slave market, and collect his payment. But as he looked down at Amy, sitting among her protectors' bodies, he found himself unable to reach for his stun baton. "Will you hurt me?" Amy asked, her voice small but steady. The question was direct, without pleading or tears. She was asking for information, not mercy. Somehow that made it worse. "I don't know," Reth answered honestly. Amy nodded as if this made perfect sense. "My mama always said honest was better than pretty lies." She hugged her stuffed tiger closer. "His name is Tommy. He's brave, like the people who took care of me." For the first time in his adult life, Reth found himself uncertain about what to do with prey that had already been caught. The child lived in Cargo Bay 3, and Reth told himself this was a practical decision. The bay had environmental controls and enough space for a small human without interfering with his ship's operations. It wasn't comfort. It was simply efficient. Resource management while he decided what to do with his unexpected passenger. Amy had been aboard the Bloodseeker for 12 days, and she was changing everything in ways Reth didn't understand. She should have been terrified. She should have cowered in the corner, crying for her dead family and begging for mercy that would never come. Instead, she explored every inch of the cargo bay with the fearless curiosity that seemed bred into her species. She asked endless questions about everything from the ship's recycling systems to the star charts displayed on the monitors. "Why do you fly alone?" she asked on the 4th day, watching Reth perform maintenance on one of his hunting drones. "Don't your people usually travel in groups?" Reth's hands stilled on the drone's neural interface. It was a more perceptive question than he'd expected from such a young creature. "Saurians are pack hunters by nature," he admitted. "But packs require sharing resources and glory. I prefer to keep what I earn." Amy considered this with the serious expression she got when processing new information. "Were you kicked out of your pack or did you leave?" The question was innocent, asked with genuine curiosity rather than any desire to cause pain. But it struck deeper than Reth wanted to admit. "I made choices my pack leader disagreed with." "What kind of choices?" Reth looked down at the child, her small face turned up toward him with complete attention. For reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself answering honestly. "I questioned orders during a raid on a civilian station. The target was a medical facility treating refugees from a war zone. My pack leader said they were legitimate military targets because they were treating enemy wounded." "But you didn't think they were bad people?" "I thought they were healers doing their job." The words came out harsher than intended. "My pack leader called me weak, said I was thinking like prey instead of a predator. So I left before he could challenge me for leadership and lose face by backing down." Amy nodded thoughtfully. "My teacher," Said sometimes being right is more important than being popular. She also said that taking care of people who are hurt isn't taking sides. It's just being decent. The casual way she spoke about her dead teacher made something twist in Reth's chest. This child had lost everything: family, home, her entire world, yet she still spoke of the people who had cared for her with warmth instead of grief. As the days passed, Reth found himself making increasingly irrational decisions. He gave Amy food from his personal stores instead of the nutritional paste meant for cargo. When she mentioned being cold, he adjusted the bay's temperature controls. He even rigged up a small washing facility so she could clean herself and her clothes. Most irrationally of all, he had started teaching her. It began when Amy found his language learning programs while exploring the entertainment system he'd installed to keep her occupied. She was fascinated by the different alien scripts and sounds, picking up basic phrases in half a dozen languages with startling speed. "How do you say thank you in Saurian?" she asked during what had become their daily conversation period. Reth demonstrated the phrase, a complex combination of clicks and hisses that most species found impossible to pronounce. Amy tried it, got it wrong, tried again, and managed a passable approximation on her third attempt. "Good," Reth found himself saying. "Your tongue position needs work, but the tone is correct." Before he knew it, he was giving her regular language lessons, then basic mathematics when she expressed curiosity about stellar navigation, then elementary physics when she wanted to understand how his ship's engines worked. Amy absorbed knowledge, like a sponge, her quick mind grasping concepts that many adult aliens struggled with. She was also useful in ways Reth hadn't expected. Her small size allowed her to reach maintenance areas that were difficult for his massive frame to access. Her nimble fingers were perfect for delicate wiring work, and her different perspective often led to insights he would never have reached on his own. "Why don't you paint your ship?" she asked one day while helping him recalibrate sensor arrays. "All the other ships I've seen have colors or patterns or pictures on them." Reth glanced at the matte black hull of the Bloodseeker. "Hunter ships avoid markings. They make you easier to track and identify." "But you're not hiding from prey animals," Amy pointed out. "You're hiding from other predators. That means you're scared of something stronger than you." The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Reth's unmarked ship was indeed designed to avoid attention from Saurian patrol fleets and rival hunters who might view him as competition or a target for elimination. "Fear is a survival tool," he said carefully. "Only the foolish ignore superior threats." Amy was quiet for a long moment, working on a particularly stubborn connection. "My papa used to say, there's a difference between being smart about danger and being scared to live. He said the first one keeps you alive, but the second one keeps you from really living." That night, alone on his bridge while Amy slept in her cargo bay, Reth found himself staring at his reflection in the darkened viewing port. When had he stopped being a hunter and become something that simply survived by avoiding everything stronger than itself? The answer came to him with uncomfortable clarity. It had been when he'd lost his pack. When he'd chosen principle over belonging, he'd also chosen isolation over purpose. He'd been drifting through space for 3 years, taking contracts that paid well but meant nothing, living without connections or goals beyond accumulating credits. Now he had a small human child asking him questions that made him examine everything he'd accepted about his life. She made him remember what it felt like to have someone depend on him, to be responsible for something beyond his own survival. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like waking up after a long, dreamless sleep. 2 weeks into their journey, Reth's ship received a priority message from Calros Station, the nearest major trading hub and slave market. The message was from a dealer named Golb, who specialized in exotic live goods. Somehow, word had reached him about Reth's unusual cargo. "Greetings, Hunter. Golb's oily voice filled the bridge. "I understand you've acquired a young human specimen. I have buyers who would pay premium rates for such merchandise, especially if it's been properly conditioned. My facility can provide training services if needed." Reth stared at the communication screen, feeling something cold settle in his stomach. This was what he'd planned to do from the beginning: sell Amy to the highest bidder and return to his solitary hunting life. It was logical, practical, and profitable. So why did the thought of handing her over to creatures like Golb make his claws extend involuntarily? He found Amy in the small workshop he'd set up for her, carefully repairing a damaged power coupling with tools he'd modified to fit her small hands. She looked up when he entered, her face brightening with the smile she always gave him. "I fixed the backup generator," she announced proudly. "It should work better now." Reth looked down at this small being who had somehow become the center of his daily existence. She trusted him completely, despite knowing what he was and what his kind did to hers. She had made herself useful, made herself pleasant company, made herself valuable in ways that had nothing to do with market prices. "Amy," he said slowly, "what do you know about where we're going?" Her smile faded slightly, but she met his eyes with that direct gaze that always unsettled him. "You're taking me somewhere. To sell me, aren't you?" The simple statement hit him like a physical blow. "How long have you known?" "Since the first day." "I'm not stupid, and I've heard the stories about your people." Amy set down her tools and folded her small hands in her lap. "I was hoping maybe you'd change your mind, but I understand if you don't. You've been kind to me, which is more than I expected." Kind. She thought keeping her in a cargo bay and teaching her languages was kindness. The gulf between their expectations was so vast it was almost funny, except nothing about this felt amusing. "Are you afraid?" Reth asked. Amy considered the question seriously. "A little. But fear doesn't change what's going to happen, so I try not to let it take up too much space in my head. That's what my mama taught me." Her matter-of-fact acceptance of her fate made Reth's decision for him. "We're not going to Calros Station," he heard himself say. "We're going somewhere else." For the first time since he'd found her, Amy looked truly surprised. "Where?" Reth didn't have an answer yet. All he knew was that he couldn't hand this brave, curious, trusting child over to people who would break her spirit and sell her body. She had already given him more than he'd given her, simply by existing and making him remember what it felt like to have someone who mattered. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But we'll figure it out together." Amy's smile returned, brighter than before. "Together sounds nice." As Reth changed course away from the slave markets, he realized he was no longer a hunter traveling alone. Somehow, without noticing it happening, he had become part of a pack again. A very small, very unusual pack, but a pack nonetheless. And for the first time in years, that felt exactly right. The distress signal reached them 3 months after Amy had become Reth's unofficial partner instead of his prisoner. She was 12 years old now, according to human standards, though she seemed far older in the ways that mattered. The months of traveling together had changed both of them in ways neither quite understood. Amy had grown more confident, her natural curiosity no longer tempered by the fear that had marked her early days aboard the Bloodseeker. She could now operate most of the ship's basic systems, spoke 4 different alien languages with varying degrees of fluency, and had proven herself surprisingly capable in the small engineering tasks that kept a hunting vessel running smoothly. Reth, for his part, had discovered that having a companion made space travel far less tedious than he'd expected. Amy's questions had forced him to examine assumptions he'd never bothered to question, and her different perspective often led to insights that improved his hunting efficiency. More than that, her presence had given him something he hadn't realized. He'd been missing. Purpose beyond simple survival. The distress call came from a human research station orbiting a gas giant in an unnamed system. The message was fragmentary, broken by static and interference, but the important parts came through clearly enough. Pirates were attacking the station. People were dying. Children were in danger. "Those are colony kids," Amy said, her young face pressed against the communication console as she tried to clean up the signal. "I can hear their voices in the background. They're from one of the education ships." Reth studied the tactical display showing the system where the distress call had originated. 3 pirate vessels, all heavily armed, attacking a research station that probably had minimal defenses. Standard protocol for any Saurian ship receiving such a call was simple. Ignore it unless specifically contracted to provide assistance. Humans were prey animals, and predators didn't risk themselves to save prey. But Amy was human, and she was looking at him with eyes that held a desperate hope. "It's too dangerous," Reth said, trying to convince himself as much as her. 3 ships against 1, and they're not small pirates. These are serious raiders with military-grade weapons. Amy's hands pressed against the console, her knuckles white with tension. "There are children down there, kids like me when my ship was attacked, kids who probably have families trying to protect them right now." The simple statement hit Reth like a physical blow. He could picture it clearly. Adult humans forming protective circles around their young, sacrificing themselves to buy a few more minutes of life for the next generation. The same scenario that had played out in the emergency pod where he'd found Amy. "My ship isn't built for fleet combat," he tried again. "It's a hunting vessel, designed for precision strikes against single targets." "But you're the best hunter in this sector," Amy said with complete confidence. "You've told me stories about taking down ships 3 times the size of yours. You've outfought entire patrol squadrons when they cornered you." That was true, but those had been carefully planned ambushes or desperate escape attempts, not direct. Assaults against superior numbers. What Amy was asking him to do was tantamount to suicide. "Even if we could damage their ships," Reth said, "it would take too long. The station will be destroyed before we can make any meaningful impact." Amy was quiet for a long moment, studying the data scrolling across her screen. Then she looked up at him with that expression he'd learned to recognize. The one that meant she'd figured out something important. "You're thinking like a predator trying to win a fight," she said. "But what if you thought like a protector trying to save people?" The distinction seemed meaningless to Reth. Combat was combat, regardless of motivation. But Amy continued before he could object. "You don't have to destroy all 3 ships. You just have to distract them long enough for people to escape. Make them think there's a bigger threat than one hunting ship." Despite himself, Reth found his tactical mind engaging with the problem. It was true that pirates were typically cowards who attacked soft targets precisely because they avoided serious resistance. If he could make them believe they were facing a genuine threat, they might withdraw rather than risk serious losses. "It's still incredibly dangerous," he said. Amy nodded seriously. "I know, but isn't that what families do? Isn't that what you did when you saved me instead of selling me?" The words struck deeper than she probably intended. In the months they'd spent together, Amy had become family in a way Reth had never experienced. Not the hierarchical pack structure of Saurian society, with its constant challenges and dominance games, but something warmer and more secure. She depended on him, but she also supported him. She followed his lead, but she also offered her own insights. She was what he'd lost when he'd been cast out of his birth pack, and more than he'd ever had before. "If we do this," Reth said slowly, "you stay on the ship. Hidden and safe. No matter what happens, you don't try to help with the fighting." Amy's expression tightened with the stubborn look he'd learned to recognize. "I can help. I'm good with the communication systems, and I know human emergency protocols. You're 12 years old. I'm also the only human on this ship, which means I'm the only one who can talk to the people we're trying to save in their own language and convince them we're here to help instead of to capture them." The logic was sound, even if Reth didn't like it. Human distrust of Saurians was well-founded, and any rescue attempt would be complicated by the natural assumption that he was just another predator looking for easy prey. The journey to the besieged station took 8 hours at maximum burn. During that time, Amy worked with the communication systems while Reth planned their approach. She managed to establish contact with the station's emergency command center, identifying herself as a human traveling with a Saurian ship that was coming to help. The initial response was exactly what Reth had expected: disbelief, suspicion, and demands to know why a Saurian would risk himself for humans. Because sometimes predators remember that protecting people is more important than hunting them, Amy replied with simple honesty. And because there are kids down there who deserve to grow up. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, the tactical situation was worse than Reth had feared. The research station was already heavily damaged, with multiple hull breaches and failing life support. 2 of the pirate ships were systematically stripping valuable equipment, while the third held position to intercept any escape pods. Dozens of small craft were drifting in space around the station: escape pods, maintenance shuttles, and personal transports that had been destroyed or disabled to prevent anyone from fleeing. The pirates weren't just raiding, they were ensuring no witnesses survived to identify them. "There," Amy said, pointing at a cluster of escape pods that were still intact but drifting helplessly. "Those pods are full of people, but their engines are dead. If we can get them moving again..." Reth studied the tactical display, his hunter's mind automatically calculating angles, distances, and timing. The plan that formed was audacious to the point of insanity. It required precise timing, perfect execution, and a considerable amount of luck. "It might work," he admitted. "But if it fails, we're both dead." Amy looked at him with complete trust. "Then we'd better not fail." As Reth began his approach run toward the first pirate ship, he realized he was no longer thinking like a solitary hunter. He was thinking like a pack leader responsible for protecting others. The shift in perspective changed everything about how he approached the coming battle. He wasn't hunting prey anymore. He was defending his family. The first attack run was a complete surprise. The Bloodseeker came screaming out of the gas giants, Shadow at maximum velocity, every weapon system firing at the pirate ship's engine section. The raiders had been so focused on their easy targets that they never saw the attack coming. The lead pirate ship's engines exploded in a brilliant cascade of plasma, leaving it drifting and powerless. Before the other 2 ships could react, Reth was already vectoring toward his second target, using the disabled vessel as a shield against return fire. "The rescue pods are responding," Amy reported from her position at the communication console. "I've got 14 pods with engine power restored and 6 more coming online. They're heading for the evacuation point." The second attack run was more difficult. The remaining pirates had shaken off their surprise and were coordinating their fire, forcing Reth to weave through a maze of energy beams and missile trails. But his hunting ship was built for exactly this kind of precision flying, and he used every trick he'd learned in years of avoiding patrol fleets. The second pirate ship took critical damage to its weapon systems before Reth was forced to break off and seek cover in the station's debris field. 2 ships down, 1 to go, but the last one was already moving to intercept the fleeing escape pods. "They're going to catch the children's transport," Amy said, her voice tight with fear. "Pod 7 has 30 kids aboard, and their engines are too damaged to outrun the pirates." Reth looked at the tactical display and felt something cold settle in his stomach. The pirate ship was between him and the fleeing transport. To reach the children in time, he would have to fly directly into the raiders' weapons fire with no cover and no room for evasive maneuvers. It was a suicide run by any rational calculation. But as he looked at Amy's face, seeing the same desperate hope he'd witnessed in the emergency pod where he'd found her, Reth realized that rational calculations no longer mattered. Some things were worth dying for. "Hold on," he told her, and pushed the Bloodseeker's engines to their maximum output. The final battle was brief, desperate, and closer than Reth ever wanted to experience again. But when it was over, the last pirate ship was drifting dead in space, and 30 human children were safely on their way to the rescue ships that had responded to Amy's coordinated distress calls. As they watched the evacuation fleet form up, around the damaged research station, Amy reached over and took Reth's clawed hand in her small human one. "Thank you," she said simply. Reth squeezed her hand gently, careful not to let his claws dig into her soft skin. "Thank you for teaching me what families do." In the months that followed, word of the rescue at Benda Prime spread throughout the sector. A Saurian hunter who had risked everything to save human children. It was the kind of story that challenged every assumption about predator and prey relationships. But Reth barely noticed the attention. He was too busy learning what it meant to be part of a family that chose to protect instead of consume. And Amy was too busy growing into the kind of person who could change the galaxy, one saved life at a time. The message from the Saurian High Command arrived exactly 6 months after the incident at Benda Prime, and Reth knew immediately that his old life had finally caught up with him. The official seal glowed red on his communication screen, the color reserved for military tribunals and execution orders. Amy stood beside his chair on the bridge, her now 15-year-old frame showing the confidence that came from 3 years of living among the stars. She had grown tall for a human, her dark hair kept in the practical style she'd adopted for shipboard life. More importantly, she had grown wise in the ways that mattered, understanding alien cultures and stellar politics with an insight that often surprised Reth. "They're calling you back to hegemony space," she said, reading the formal summons over his shoulder. Her voice was calm, but Reth could detect the undercurrent of worry she was trying to hide. "A military tribunal," Reth confirmed, scrolling through the legal language. "Charges of conduct unbecoming a hunter, unauthorized engagement with hostile forces and—" He paused, his claws clenching involuntarily. "Corruption by inferior species influence." The last charge was the one that could get him executed. Saurian law was explicit about hunters who became too close to their prey. It was considered a form of mental illness that could spread to other members of the pack if not dealt with swiftly and permanently. Amy was quiet for a long moment, her quick mind working through the implications. "What happens if you don't go?" "I become a fugitive. Every Saurian ship in the galaxy becomes my enemy, and they'll never stop hunting me." Reth turned to face her, studying the human child who had somehow become the most important thing in his universe. "More importantly, they'll hunt you too, as evidence of my corruption." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Amy was strong and resourceful, but she was still human, still small compared to the vast machinery of Saurian military power. If the High Command wanted her eliminated, there were few places in the galaxy where she could hide. "Then we go," Amy said with the matter-of-fact tone that always amazed Reth. "We face whatever they throw at us." "Amy, you don't understand what you're saying. This isn't just a legal hearing. This is a trial designed to end with my execution. And your enslavement or death. The Saurian High Command doesn't forgive challenges to their authority." Amy moved to stand directly in front of him, her brown eyes meeting his reptilian gaze without flinching. "Then we prove them wrong. We show them what we've learned about families and protecting people and why that makes us stronger, not weaker." The simple confidence in her voice made Reth's heart ache. She still believed that logic and truth could overcome prejudice and fear, that good intentions could stand against institutional power. It was a very human way of thinking, and it was probably going to get them both killed. But it was also exactly why he couldn't abandon her now. The journey back to Hegemony Central took 2 weeks. During that time, Amy threw herself into preparation with the intensity she brought to everything she cared about. She studied Saurian law, military regulations, and tribunal procedures with an attention to detail that would have impressed any legal scholar. "Did you know that Saurian military law allows for character witnesses?" she asked on the 7th day, looking up from a stack of legal documents she'd downloaded from the ship's database. "In theory," Reth replied, "but no one would speak for a hunter accused of corruption. It would destroy their own standing in the pack." "What about non-Saurians?" "The law doesn't specify that witnesses have to be from your species." Reth paused in his maintenance of the ship's weapon systems. "No one has ever tried to call alien witnesses to a Saurian tribunal. It would be considered an insult to the court." Amy's expression took on the stubborn look he'd learned to recognize. "Maybe it's time someone tried." The closer they got to Hegemony Central, the more messages began arriving on their communication system. Word of Reth's tribunal had spread throughout the sector, and the responses were not what either of them had expected. The first message came from Commander Torres of the human patrol ship Defiant Spirit, one of the vessels they had saved at Benda Prime. "Hunter Reth," her recorded voice filled the bridge. "I don't know what charges they're bringing against you, but I want you to know that every human in this sector considers you a friend and ally. You saved 47 lives that day, including mine and my daughter's. That means something, regardless of what your people say." More messages followed. Captain Yoon of the cargo hauler Lucky Strike, whose crew Reth had rescued from pirates the year before. Dr. Prish, a Centaurian medic whose hospital ship Reth had defended from raiders. Even civilian merchants and colony administrators who had benefited from his protection over the past 3 years. Amy played each message for him, her eyes bright with something that might have been tears. "You see? You're not alone in this. You have a pack. It's just bigger and more diverse than the Saurians expected." Hegemony Central was a massive space station built into a hollowed-out asteroid, its dark bulk bristling with weapons and docking bays. As their ship was guided into the military section by automated systems, Reth felt the weight of his people's judgment pressing down on him like a physical force. The tribunal chamber was exactly as Reth remembered from his youth, a circular room designed to make the accused feel small and isolated. Tiered seating rose around the central platform where he would stand trial, and the lighting was arranged to cast harsh shadows across anyone standing in the defendant's position. Pack Leader Voss presided over the proceedings, his massive form, draped in the ceremonial robes that marked his authority. The other tribunal members were hunters Reth recognized from his past, old packmates who had once respected him, now sitting in judgment of his choices. "Hunter Reth," Voss's voice echoed through the chamber. "You stand accused of abandoning your nature as a predator and allowing yourself to be corrupted by prey animal influence. How do you answer these charges?" Reth stood straight on the defendant's platform, very aware that Amy sat in the gallery behind him despite regulations that typically excluded non-Saurians from military proceedings. Her presence gave him strength he hadn't expected to need. "I answer that I have evolved beyond simple predator instincts," Reth said clearly. "I have learned that true strength comes from protection, not destruction." A ripple of angry hisses swept through the assembled hunters. Pack Leader Voss raised one clawed hand for silence. "You admit to abandoning your nature?" "I admit to discovering a better nature." The formal presentation of evidence took most of the first day. Voss and his prosecutors laid out their case methodically. Reth's rescue of a human child, his refusal to sell her into slavery, his repeated interventions on behalf of prey species, and his ultimate participation in armed conflict against other predators for the benefit of humans. Each piece of evidence was presented as proof of corruption, of a hunter who had lost his way and become something shameful and weak. The prosecutor spoke of contamination, of mental illness, of the need to purge such thinking before it could spread to other hunters. Amy sat through it all in silence, her young face carefully neutral. But Reth could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched when the prosecutors described her as a tool of corruption that had twisted his thinking. On the second day, Reth was allowed to present his defense. He spoke of the lessons Amy had taught him, that protecting others created bonds stronger than fear, that cooperation achieved more than domination, that choosing to defend the weak was a mark of strength rather than corruption. The human child opened my eyes to possibilities I had never considered, he told the tribunal. She showed me that a predator's greatest achievement is not the prey he kills, but the lives he chooses to preserve. Pack leader Voss leaned forward, his eyes glittering with contempt. Pretty words, but they cannot disguise what you have become. A traitor to your own species, seduced by the weakness of your prey. That was when Amy stood up in the gallery. "May I speak?" she asked in perfect Saurian, her young voice carrying clearly through the chamber. The tribunal erupted in shocked protests. No prey animal had ever addressed a Saurian military court. The very idea was unprecedented, insulting, unthinkable. But Voss raised his hand for silence, his expression curious. "This should be amusing. Let the pet speak." Amy stepped forward to the witness platform, her small human frame dwarfed by the massive architecture designed for 8-foot Saurian warriors, but her voice was steady as she addressed the court. "Honored hunters," she began, using the formal address she had memorized from her legal studies. "You call me a tool of corruption, but you don't understand what I am or what I represent." She gestured toward Reth. "This hunter found me surrounded by the bodies of my family, humans who died protecting me simply because I was too young to protect myself. He could have sold me for profit or killed me for sport. Instead, he chose something harder." The chamber was completely silent now, every hunter leaning forward to hear her words. "He chose to protect me. Not because I was valuable, but because protection is what families do. And in doing so, he became stronger than any hunter who only knows how to destroy." Amy's voice grew stronger as she continued. "You think caring makes you weak, but you're wrong. Reth has saved hundreds of lives in the past 3 years. He's defeated pirate fleets, protected trade routes, and earned the respect of dozens of species across this sector. He's done things that entire Saurian hunting packs couldn't accomplish, and he's done them because he fights for something beyond himself." Pack leader Voss's expression had shifted from amusement to something colder. "Impressive words for such a young creature, but they don't change what you are, prey manipulating a predator through weakness and sentiment." Amy lifted, her chin defiantly. "Then explain this to me, honored pack leader. If sentiment makes predators weak, why is Reth the only Saurian here who has ever saved lives instead of just taking them? If caring is corruption, why are you also afraid of one corrupted hunter and the child he protects?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Reth watched his former packmates shift uncomfortably in their seats, unable to answer without admitting either that Amy was right or that they were afraid of what she represented. "You call me prey," Amy continued, "but I'm not the one sitting in judgment of others, because I'm terrified of change. I'm not the one who needs an entire tribunal to face one hunter who chose a different path. You want to know what corruption looks like? It's being so afraid of growth that you'd rather destroy anyone who proves you might be wrong." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from the back of the chamber, came the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. Captain Torres stood in the gallery, her human patrol uniform a stark contrast to the Saurian military dress surrounding her. Behind her stood Dr. Prish, Captain Yoon, and a dozen other beings whose lives Reth had touched over the past 3 years. "That," Torres said clearly, "is why humans guard their own, and why some of us are proud to call a Saurian hunter family." Pack Leader Voss's eyes narrowed dangerously. Aliens have no voice in Saurian law. But I do, Amy said quietly, by right of the Guardian Bond. The chamber exploded into chaos. The Guardian Bond was ancient law, older than the hegemony itself, a sacred covenant that allowed pack members to claim protection over individuals of any species, binding them with oaths that superseded military authority. A prey animal cannot invoke, Voss began. She already has, interrupted Elder Kess from his position among the tribunal judges. The ancient Saurian's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The bond was established through shared danger, mutual protection, and formal acknowledgement before witnesses. By our oldest laws, she is pack. Amy stepped closer to Reth, her small hand finding his massive clawed one. I invoke the Guardian Bond, she said formally. I claim protection as pack sister to Hunter Reth, and I challenge any who would harm him to face me first. The absurdity of a 15-year-old human girl challenging the Saurian High Command should have been laughable. Instead, the chamber fell completely silent as the weight of ancient law settled over them all. Pack Leader Voss stared at Amy with something approaching respect. You realize what you've done, young human? You've made yourself a target for every hunter who sees your bond as an insult to our ways. Amy squeezed Reth's hand and smiled with the fearless confidence that had first captured his attention years ago. Let them come. They'll learn what Reth learned, that families who protect each other are stronger than hunters who stand alone. As the tribunal struggled to process the legal implications of what had just occurred, Reth looked down at the small human who had somehow turned a death sentence into a declaration of war against everything the Saurian hegemony represented. She was going to change the galaxy, one challenge to unjust authority at a time, and he was going to be right beside her when she did it. 5 years had passed since the tribunal that changed everything, and the galaxy was learning what it meant, when humans and their allies decided to guard each other. The ship that bore the name Guardian's Promise was unlike anything that had ever sailed between the stars. Built with combined human engineering and Saurian military technology, it served as both warship and rescue vessel, carrying a crew that represented 24 different species united by a simple principle: protect those who cannot protect themselves. Amy, now 20 years old, stood at the command station reviewing the latest reports from across the sector. Her official title was Communications Coordinator, but everyone aboard knew she was really the heart of their operation. She had grown into the kind of leader who inspired loyalty not through fear or authority, but through example and genuine care for others. Reth watched her from his position at the tactical console, still amazed by how much she had accomplished in such a short time. The scared child he had found in that emergency pod had become a woman who could coordinate rescue operations across multiple star systems, negotiate with hostile alien governments, and inspire former enemies to work together for common goals. We've got 3 active situations, Amy reported to the bridge crew. Slavers hit a mining colony in the Vega system. There's a medical emergency on a deep space research station and... She paused, her expression darkening. Pirates are attacking civilian transports in the Centauri shipping lanes. The same kinds of emergencies they had been responding to for years, but now they had the resources to actually make a difference. The Guardian's Promise was one of 12 ships in their growing fleet, each one crewed by beings who had learned that protecting others was more rewarding than preying on them. The Centauri situation is closest, reported Commander Torres from the navigation station. The former human patrol captain had become Reth's second-in-command after her own government had tried to court-martial her for cooperating with Saurian hunters. We could be there in 6 hours. Reth studied the tactical data streaming across his screens. 4 pirate vessels attacking a convoy of civilian freighters, the kind of odds that would have made him hesitate years ago when he was just one hunter with one ship, Now he commanded a battle group that could handle threats 10 times that size. But the real change wasn't in their firepower. It was in how they used it. "Signal the fleet," Reth ordered. "All ships converge on Centauri. Standard rescue protocol. Save lives first. Capture pirates if possible, but don't take unnecessary risks." The philosophy that guided their operations was simple. Every life was worth saving, even their enemies if circumstances allowed. It was a radical departure from the traditional predator-prey relationship that had dominated galactic politics for centuries. As they entered hyperspace toward the crisis, Amy made her way to Reth's station with the casual familiarity of someone who had spent half her life aboard starships. "The mining colony situation is being handled by Captain Eve and the Second Chance," she reported. "Dr. Prish is routing her medical ship to the research station. That leaves us free to focus on the pirates." Reth nodded, still sometimes amazed by how efficiently their network operated. What had started as a single saurian hunter and his human ward had grown into an organization that stretched across multiple sectors, staffed by beings from dozens of species who had all learned the same lesson about the power of cooperation. "Any word from the hegemony?" he asked quietly. Amy's expression tightened slightly. The Saurian government had never forgiven them for the precedent set at Reth's tribunal. They considered the Guardian fleet to be a dangerous infection that threatened the natural order of predator and prey relationships throughout the galaxy. "Pack Leader Voss has been making noise about restoring proper authority to this sector," Amy replied. "Intelligence suggests he's been building a fleet of his own, designed specifically to hunt us down." The confrontation they had all been expecting for years was finally approaching. Voss had never accepted the legitimacy of the Guardian bond or the legal precedent it had set. To him, Reth and Amy represented everything wrong with the modern galaxy, predators who had forgotten their place and prey who had grown too bold. "How long before he moves against us?" Reth asked. "Soon," Amy said simply. "But we'll be ready." The battle in the Centauri system was brief but decisive. The pirate ships had been expecting easy prey in the form of lightly armed merchant vessels. They were not prepared for the coordinated assault of the Guardian's Promise and her escort ships. Within 2 hours, 3 of the 4 pirate vessels had been disabled and their crews taken into custody. The 4th had escaped, but not before. The Guardian fleet had rescued over 300 civilian crew members and passengers from the damaged freighters. It was the kind of operation they had run dozens of times before, but this time something was different. As they were processing the rescued civilians and captured pirates, Amy noticed something troubling in the interrogation reports. "These weren't random attacks," she told Reth as they reviewed the intelligence gathered from the captured raiders. "The pirates were specifically targeting ships carrying Guardian fleet sympathizers, merchants who do business with us, colony, officials who support our operations, even families of crew members." Reth felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. "Voss is trying to isolate us, cut off our support network before he makes his final move." The strategy was classically Saurian: eliminate the prey's escape routes before closing in for the kill. But Voss had made one crucial miscalculation. The Guardian fleet's support didn't come from fear or obligation. It came from genuine gratitude and shared values. The attack on their supporters had exactly the opposite effect of what Voss intended. Instead of driving people away from the Guardian fleet, it brought them closer together. Messages began pouring in from across the sector. Colony governors offering to host Guardian fleet bases. Merchant captains volunteering their ships for supply runs. Even individual families sending what support they could spare. "Look at this," Amy said, showing Reth a message from a human colony they had helped 2 years earlier. "They're offering to loan us their entire defensive fleet, 12 patrol ships and crews to operate them." Similar offers came from the Centaurian, Medical Guild, the Arcturian Trader Consortium, and dozens of smaller groups. What Voss saw as a criminal organization threatening galactic order, others saw as the only force standing between them and chaos. The final confrontation came 3 weeks later, in the neutral space between the human and Saurian territories. Voss arrived with a fleet of 30 hunting ships, the largest military force the hegemony had assembled in decades. His message to the Guardian fleet was simple: surrender Reth and Amy for execution, disband the organization, and return to proper predator-prey relationships or be destroyed. Amy stood beside Reth on the bridge of the Guardian's Promise, looking out at the enemy fleet through the main viewing port. She was no longer the frightened child he had found in that emergency pod, but she still had the same determined expression when facing impossible odds. "Any regrets?" Reth asked her quietly. Amy smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. "About which part? Surviving when I should have died? Learning that families are stronger than hierarchies? Or proving that predators and prey can become something better together?" "About any of it." Amy considered the question seriously, as she always did. "The only thing I regret is that it took a galactic war to teach people what we learned in a cargo bay years ago, that taking care of each other makes everyone stronger." The battle that followed would be remembered as the turning point in galactic history, not because of the ships that were destroyed or the lives that were lost, but because of what it proved about the power of cooperation over domination. The Guardian fleet was outnumbered 3-1, but they fought with a coordination and purpose that Voss's hunters couldn't match. More importantly, they fought to protect rather than to conquer, which changed everything about how the battle developed. When Saurian hunting ships found themselves disabled and drifting, Guardian fleet vessels moved to rescue the crews instead of destroying them. When civilian ships were caught in the crossfire, both sides stopped shooting to allow evacuations. And when Voss himself was left stranded after his flagship was crippled, it was Amy who insisted they beam him aboard their ship instead of leaving him to die. The war ended not with victory or defeat, but with understanding. Voss, faced with the reality of beings who would risk their lives to save even their enemies, finally comprehended what Reth and Amy had been trying to show their species all along. Strength wasn't about who you could defeat. It was about who you chose to protect. "I still don't understand," Voss said during their final meeting, his massive form looking somehow diminished despite his physical presence. "How does protecting the weak make you stronger?" Amy, sitting across from the former pack leader in the ship's conference room, answered with the same patient tone she had used to explain human nature to Reth years earlier. "Because when you protect others, they protect you back. When you help them grow stronger, they help you become better. And when you treat everyone as family instead of prey, you discover that the galaxy is full of people worth fighting for." It was a simple concept, but it reshaped everything. The Guardian fleet grew into the Guardian Alliance, a multi-species organization dedicated to mutual protection and aid. Former Saurian hunters learned to work alongside human rescue teams, Centaurian medical units, and Arcturian engineering corps. The rigid hierarchy of predator and prey gave way to partnerships based on respect and shared purpose. Amy eventually became the Alliance's first elected leader, chosen not because of her species or her military rank, but because she understood better than anyone else how to build bridges between former enemies. Reth served as her military advisor and closest friend, the predator who had learned to be a protector standing beside the prey who had taught him what families could accomplish together. They never forgot the lesson learned in that first emergency. Pod. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose to save someone else, even when it costs you everything. And sometimes, especially then, you discover that what you save ends up saving you right back. The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of genuine threats that required strength and courage to face. But it was also full of people worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth calling family even when they looked nothing like you. And that, Amy and Reth had learned, made all the difference in the universe.